Thank you, Andrew. Andrew Humphrey is here. He's an advisor and trainer in higher education to talk about visa options that are available at the conclusion of a Tier 4 visa. We're also joined in the chat by Gail Bunbury, who is our compliance manager. I'm sure most of you will know Gail if you have a Tier 4 visa, and also by Sunita, who's here from the incubation team. So maybe if anyone has specific questions about kind of sponsorship by incubation or anything like that, we might be able to include Sunita, and we'll certainly pass on her and Har's details for anyone with any questions related to that. So yeah, Andrew, over to you. We'll leave it to you. I know we were talking about you would cover maybe for about the first half hour kind of options around Tier 2, change to a Tier 2 visa, then see if anyone has questions around that and sponsorship initially, and then move on to some of the other options for the end of the session.
Okay, so not a hugely diverse image, sorry about that, and also perhaps one of the less interesting seasons of The Apprentice, but there you go. So thanks everybody for coming, and so let's just rattle through what I'm going to cover today. We're going to look at briefly, really just to get it out of the way, the 2-year graduate route, which is starting next summer, which from my understanding of who's been invited today is not going to be something that you guys are going to benefit from in the short term. But I will give the basic information just because everybody is very keen to know the information. But I'm afraid the takeaway will probably be that it's not something that's going to be helpful for you. But I'll quickly move on to things that are helpful for you, in particular looking at switching to a Tier 2 visa for sponsored skilled work. And we're going to take a good chunk of time looking at that, because at the moment, that's the most common visa route to switch to out of Tier 4, whether you're switching within the UK or coming back in the future for Tier 2. And I will look at both ways of doing that. Briefly, I will remind you about the startup visa, which is for people running new businesses, and let you know who you speak to at the university about that. A little bit about quite a niche type of visa, but important to know about, what's called Tier 5 government authorised exchange. So a quick word about that one. And then other options as well that are more really for very specific people, but some of them are worth knowing about. So I will signpost those to you. And as we said, I will answer your questions as best I can. We'll take a bit of time after the Tier 2 presentation to answer some specific questions, but forgive us if we can't take all of the Tier 2 questions, because we do need to leave some time for everything else at the end. So first of all, just really to get it out of the way, because there's been lots of news about it, and unfortunately the news for you guys is not good. The graduate immigration route is what we're talking about, and this is the government's new scheme that was announced last September and will actually launch in what they're calling summer 2021. The actual start date, as in month, day, etc., has not yet been confirmed, but I think it's fairly clear that it will only be for people who are graduating next summer and who have an extant Tier 4 visa at that point. So for those of you who are completing at the moment or recently completed, not something that will help you. For people who can apply, they apply in the UK. Unfortunately, 2019 and 2020 graduates are not eligible, unfortunately. This will only be something that's relevant to you if you are actually a 2021 graduate, i.e. you're moving on to further study after this. If you want more information, the Home Office produce a really good fact sheet, and I don't often say that Home Office materials are good. They produced a fact sheet in last October with all of the kind of detail as we have it so far about the graduate route, and there's an alias URL, tinyurl.com/graduate route. You can look at that, and then don't anybody say I'm not up to the minute, because just yesterday, 13th of July, in the context of the very kind of detailed announcement from the government about the new points-based system coming next January, there is a little further update about the graduate scheme. But I think rather than rub your noses in it, let's move on to something that will be much more useful, and that is Tier 2 General. So now what is Tier 2 General? Well, Tier 2 General is two things. The first thing it is is it's a skilled work visa for a non-EEA, so a non-European Economic Area national, to come to the UK to do a skilled job here, and that there is no local person to fill the vacancy of. I think my English kind of got a bit mangled there, but it is also, and more pertinent to you, it's also a skilled work visa for a graduate to stay in the UK for a skilled job, regardless of whether there's a local person to fill the vacancy. So the overarching purpose is to bring people to the UK, but the secondary purpose, which is the most important purpose for students, is to keep people in the UK when they are studying here. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that soon. It's sponsored by an employer to do a specific job. So it's not just an open permit to do whatever work you want to do. That really, until the graduate route kicks in, that doesn't exist. A work visa will always be sponsored by the employer to do a specific job, and that's what it is with the Tier 2 General. And I suppose the way to think about it is it's the same principle as your Tier 4 visa that was sponsored by the university to do your specific course. Just in a very parallel fashion, a Tier 2 visa is sponsored by your employer to do a specific job. There's a direct kind of correlation with how Tier 4 works. So what are the basics and the eligibility for Tier 2? Well, the job must meet a minimum skill level of what's technically called RQF level 6, which equates to degree level or higher, or, which is quite a useful little kind of, what the word is really, a bit of not a loophole exactly, but just an extra feature for people in what are called creative sector occupations. They can actually meet a job that's at a slightly lower skill level. Technically speaking, RQF 4 corresponds to, I believe, the first year of undergraduate study. But what the government have decided is that they will slightly lower that for creative sector occupations. Now, if you're wondering what exactly is a creative sector occupation, I'm just going to quickly run through the list of what the government says are creative sector occupations. They are artists, authors, writers, translators, actors, entertainers, presenters, dancers, choreographers, or designers of products, clothing, or other related design roles. So if you're looking at any of those that I've just rattled off in that list, then the job can be at RQF level 4. If it's not a creative job, it's at RQF level 6. Jobs offered under Tier 2 also have a minimum salary. Now, technically speaking, for most jobs, that is £30,000 salary, but there's also a new entrance minimum salary, which is about a third lower, which is 20,800, and that is virtually always the salary that is applied to somebody coming out of studies into Tier 2. And the reason is that a new entrant means several different things. One of the things it means is anybody switching from Tier 4 to Tier 2. So that's very handy. So you know instantly if you're switching within the UK from Tier 4 to Tier 2 that you meet that salary. But it also means anybody under 26 making the application. So including people who are applying in their home country, not switching out of Tier 4 to Tier 2, but having gone home and then coming back under Tier 2. They still can be new entrants if they're under 26 when they apply. There are a couple of other people who are included as new entrants, but they're much more rare. So it would be broadly those. The procedure is very similar to when you apply for your student visa. The employer issues what's called a COS, a certificate of sponsorship. So for your Tier 4 visa, you had your CAS, and for your Tier 2 visa, you have your COS. And I'll be talking about the COSs as we go through, but it means certificate of sponsorship. And once you have that, it's a virtual document that's kind of raised on a Home Office system. You can make your visa application. Now, the interesting thing here is that just by a quirk of history, the whole Tier 2 visa will be discontinued on the 31st of December this year and replaced the next day by the skilled worker visa. There are some differences between skilled worker and Tier 2, and they are mostly helpful to you. And I'll look at those a little bit later. Okay, so let's just look a little bit more at the eligible jobs and salaries. Now, if you're wanting to look at what types of jobs and indeed what specific jobs are included, there are online resources where you can have a look. So I'm going to quickly have a look at them with you in a moment, but let me just tell you where they are. They're the codes of practice, which are Appendix J of the immigration rules. Now, the immigration rules are available at gov.uk, and we'll have a look at them in a minute. But within that, there are 3 tables. There's Table 1, which is PhD level jobs. That's just what they're called, hence my quotes. They don't require a PhD, they're just considered PhD level jobs. There's Table 2, which is degree level jobs. And there's Table 3, which are level 4 jobs. And as I said earlier, creative jobs on that table are eligible for Tier 2. Now, when you start looking at the individual jobs on those lists, you will see that it's not only about the level, but it will include the minimum salary as well. So all codes include a specific minimum salary for that job and the 30% lower new starter minimum salary. So I'm going to have a go at, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, and then I'm going to try and get us onto the internet so we can have a look at the, here we go. Okay, so I'm now just sharing my browser. And so what I'm looking at here, this is the on the gov.uk website, just publicly available website, whiz all the way to the top. This is the page all about the immigration rules. All of the different rules for all of the different ways to come to the UK. But I'm going to whiz through right to the end, because after all the rules, you've got lots of appendices. And so the appendix that we're going to have a quick look at, and you can kind of have a more detailed look in your own time, is this one, Immigration Rules Appendix J, the Codes of Practice for Skilled Work. So let's have a look at that. So slightly bewildering range of tables, but remember I said there's only 3 that are relevant to you. There's the occupation skill to PhD level, and then this one here, Table 2, are the degree level jobs, and then this one, Table 3, are the creative jobs. So let's just have a look so you're familiar with how jobs are described on here. So every job has a code. So let's, for example, have a look at, I was given some suggestions of the sorts of things that might be relevant to you guys. So what about this one here? So this is the broad category 1134, advertising and public relations directors. Now this is an interesting example because here is an example. So you've got all the job description, but if we go down to the salary rates here, you can see the new entrant rate is actually 29,600. Now remember I said that the minimum new entrant rate is 20,800. Well, it's actually 20,800 or the specific new entrant rate for that job, whichever is the higher. So this is an example where the new entrant rate for advertising and PR directors is considerably higher than the minimum. So a job that you were offered in this category would have to pay 29,600, even at the new entrant rate, which is quite a lot higher than the minimum. We can compare that with, let me just see if I can, because there's another category that's actually the opposite. So let's have a quick look. I think rather than whiz through it all, I'll leave it to you to have a look. But going by these numbers at the side, have a look at category, let me see, 2472, which is PR professionals, because the new entrant rate there is 21,200, which is only just above the minimum. So that's quite a lot lower. And then if you look at the specific code of practice for architects, which is 2431, that has 3 different new entrant rates depending on where you are in your architecture studies and qualification. So do have a look. This is going to be the most important list, and any employer, this is what they are going to be looking at. If they are wanting to offer you a job with Tier 2 sponsorship, they have to make sure that the job, including the skill and the salary level, are on this list. So a really handy list to know about. quickly, let's have a look at number 4, because any of you who are looking in a more creative field, whoops, let's just go back there. As I said, the level 4 jobs, the slightly lower level, here we go. If it's a creative job, then it can be under here. And artists are under here. Let's just have a quick look. Yeah, so here are artists, for example, and like all of them, it gives a sort of job spec of what it means to be an artist in this context. But if you see here, the new entrant rate is actually 20,400. Now that is lower than the minimum for tier 2. So this is one of the examples where the job that you were doing would have to be more than the new entrant rate, because it has to pay either at the absolute minimum, which is 20,800, or the actual minimum, whichever is the higher, not whichever is the lower. So this is an example of where you would have to actually be paid a bit more than the new entrant rate. Okay, I'm going to leave you to look at those. I'll give you some links at the end to those. I want to take a bit of time to look very specifically at switching from tier 4 in the UK, because there's 2 different ways to do it. You can switch in the UK, or you can apply in your home country. Now, there are some specific advantages for employers to sponsor you for applying in the UK. And I don't really want to talk about them too much because they're really not your concern. They are for the employers, but it is useful to know about that there are concessions for employers compared to employing somebody coming from overseas. So for example, an employer does not need to run the resident labour market test, which is the test whereby they're checking if there's a local person who can do the job. That's not relevant from switching from tier 4 to tier 2. There's also no immigration skills charge for the employer to pay, which can be up to £1,000 to bring from someone from outside of the UK. So it's cheaper for them. Also, it's not subject to any cap on certificates of sponsorship on COSs. Your employer might only have a small allocation of COSs, but this sponsoring you to switch doesn't actually come from there. So they are really nice concessions for employers that they should know about, but you might have to remind them about. There are concessions for you as well. As I said, the minimum salary is 20,800, not 30,000. And you can usually start work as soon as you've applied. You don't have to wait to be issued with the tier 2 visa in order to start work. But I will talk a little bit about that in a minute. Now, a couple of kind of niggly things do kick in when you're applying to switch from tier 4 to tier 2 in the UK. One of them is fairly straightforward, and that is that whatever course is making you eligible to switch from tier 4 to tier 2, so your degree course, it must have been studied during your most recent tier 4 visa, which it nearly always is, or during a continuous series of visas that includes your current visa. So what does that mean? Well, that means that the relevant course that makes you eligible to switch from tier 4 to tier 2 can be one you actually did previously. It doesn't have to be the current course, but as long as you've had continuous visas since then. Now, your employer will be looking at that, and your employer should know about that. But I just wanted to throw that in as a possible conversation to have with your employer if they are not sure that your current course makes you eligible to switch, but you have a previous course that you studied in a series of visas anyway. Application deadlines for applying in the UK. Well, the earliest you can apply, that's changed quite a lot over recent years. The way it is now and has been since April 2019 is really beneficial to you guys. You can apply from up to 3 months before the end date of your degree course. Now that's the formal end date of your degree course, whatever was given as the end of your course on your original CAS. From 3 months before that, you can, in theory, make an application to switch into tier 2. The latest you can apply in the UK, obviously, is the day your tier 4 visa expires. You can't simply stay in the UK and apply with no permission to be here. But if you are applying in your home country, there's no deadline for that. You could apply any time to come back to the UK under tier 2. I mentioned about starting work, and this is just really to reassure people that if you do apply for a tier 2 visa in the UK, you don't need to wait to get it in order to start work. The rules are a little bit messed up on this, but the takeaway is that you can start work. So what it actually is if you apply after getting your results, which you don't need to, Because remember, you can apply up to 3 months before you've even finished the course, never mind got your results. But if you do wait until after you get your results, or your current Tier 4 visa was granted on or after the 1st of October, which it probably wasn't, you can start work immediately. But even if you apply before getting your results, and even if your visa was granted before that, you can nearly always start the job. You can't start the actual job, but the employer can employ you on a temporary basis under your Tier 4 work conditions. And that's up to your employer to work out. Most employers, my impression anyway, is that they want you to work, so they would rather start you on a temporary version of the job and then kind of make the change behind the scenes when you get your Tier 2 visa. But that's a conversation to have with your employer. It's nearly always okay. Now, wherever you're applying, whether you're applying in the UK or whether you're applying at home, there are certain things that are just attached to the Tier 2 application that you need to meet. So I'm not talking about the jobs and the level and the study or anything to do with your actual employment. I'm now talking about the eligibility, the other eligibility for the visa. And so it's good to have that in mind, so at least you're prepared, because particularly some of the amounts of money are quite spendy. So here are the application, the maintenance that you need to show. You'll remember for your Tier 4 visa, you had to show evidence of money. Well, that's the same for every visa. So what you need to show is a sum of £945 or more, obviously, held for 90 days. So you might remember from your Tier 4 visa, it was 28 days. The Tier 4 28 days is an anomaly. For most other visas, it's 90 days. The money must be held in your own name. There's no provision for it to be held in a parent's name or in anybody else's name. So that's useful to know in advance. Now, day 90 of the 90 days, so the end of the period that shows you've had the money for 90 days, it can be the date of the application if you've managed to get statements on the date of application, but it doesn't need to be. That day 90 can be up to 31 days before you make the application. So you don't have to kind of hit the ground running when you get your bank statement and apply immediately. It can be up to 31 days before. So that's fine. There is one kind of way of applying without showing the maintenance yourself, and that's when your Tier 2 sponsor is happy to certify on the COS that they will what's called certify your maintenance, which whether that means they're literally giving you money or not is kind of up to you and the employer. But what they're saying is, we are confirming that this person meets the maintenance requirement. So if you find yourself, for whatever reason, not able to meet the maintenance requirement, either because of the number of days or money dipping below or something like that, it's a possible conversation to have with your Tier 2 sponsor. A bit like I was saying earlier, have the conversation about when you can start work. You know, clearly they want you, and clearly they've recruited you and have gone out to bat for you by sponsoring your visa. So personally, I don't think you have anything to lose by asking them if they can help you with this aspect of the visa application. Why not? If you want to know more about the whole money aspect, how the money can be held and all of that kind of stuff, I'm not going to go into that now, but it's all in the Tier 2 policy guidance, which you can find at gov.uk. A couple of other things that do kick in for people who have previously been students, and this is whether they apply in the UK or after they've gone home in order to come back again. If you were, and it is time bound, in the last 12 months fully sponsored by a government or an international scholarship agency, so that means you had a fee, your fees and your maintenance were paid either by a government, so your home government or the UK government, or any other government, I suppose, or an international scholarship agency, you must have their written consent for the Tier 2 application. So it's an extra document that scholarship students need. And really the thinking behind that is that some scholarships do have strings attached. And so the Home Office want to make sure that whoever sponsored you for your studies is happy that you're making this application. So it is reasonable, and it is, and where it is an issue, it's normally in the terms and conditions of the scholarship. But just to say, the immigration rules don't require the consent of the scholarship of the provider of the scholarship if it was only fees or just a partial scholarship, or if it was a scholarship from a university or an international company or some other type of official financial sponsor. It's only full scholarship, and if that's from a government or an international scholarship agency. So if that's you, any Tier 2 application you make within 12 months of having had that, whether it's in the UK or overseas, will need the consent. And as I say, they do check the terms and conditions of the scholarship. So getting down to the nitty-gritty, the application fees, and these are the same wherever you apply in the UK or at home, they're based on the length of the course. So the period of sponsorship for the course can again be negotiated with the employer, or they may have a rule of thumb that they always have the same length, but there may be some room for that. If it's 3 years or less, the application fee is £704. It's a funny figure, but there you go. And if it's 3 years or less and what's called a shortage occupation, it's £464. Now, shortage occupations are not really that relevant when you're applying in the UK. In fact, they're not relevant, except in this very specific context. If you want to check if your job is a shortage occupation, it's another one of those appendices to the immigration rules. It's actually Appendix K of the immigration rules. But the only advantage of having that kind of occupation if you're applying in the UK is that the application fee is lower. If you're looking at more than 3 years, this is when the application fees get quite expensive. So it's exactly double if it's more than 3 years, £1,408. And again, double for 3 years, more than 3 years for a shortage occupation, £928. Now, of course, there are other fees attached. If you remember back to when you made your Tier 4 application, there were other fees that you had to pay or you could choose to pay. One of them that you can't choose about whether to pay is the immigration health surcharge. At the moment, that's £400 a year. The bad news is it's increasing by quite a margin to £624 a year from the 1st of October 2020. That's payable by the applicant separately from when they make the payment for the application. Again, if that's an issue, I don't see any harm in asking an employer if they might be willing to advance that for you or pay that for you. It's up to your judgment of how kind of forward you want to be with employers asking about that. And indeed the application fee as well. You might find that an employer offers or might be willing to pay the application fee for you. That's not their responsibility, but some employers, may be very amenable, and why not? If you want a premium application, perhaps because you need your visa quickly because you want to travel or something like that, you would need to add another £610. So if you add all of those together, they are getting very expensive indeed. So if, as may well happen given the current state of the economy and recruitment in general, if you're not able to secure an offer of a Tier 2 job before the end of your current Tier 4 visa and you do need to go home, at least in the short term, you can apply for Tier 2 in your home country. So a couple of extra things. At the moment, Tier 2 is only available until the 31st of December, but I know I said earlier that there is no deadline, but that's because there will be a replacement for Tier 2 coming in January. You can still meet the new entrant minimum salary if you're under 26, or if you were recruited in what's called the University Milk Round. I'm not at all sure that there was a University Milk Round this year. And remember, the job can still be level 4 if it's a creative or a shortage occupation. That's not just a thing for applying in the UK. But remember, if you're applying within 12 months of having received a full scholarship from a government or an international scholarship provider, you still will need that consent of your scholarship provider. A little bit more about applying in your home country. The employer does need to use one of their restrictive causes. So it's not just above and beyond their quota as it would be if you were applying in the UK, unless your salary, you're lucky enough to have a salary paying this amount or more, in which very generously the government allow them to not use a restrictive cause. At the moment anyway, if you apply outside of the UK, that's when the employer does have to run the resident labour market test, where they check whether there is somebody in the UK local labour market who can do the job. Remember, that's not applied if you apply in the UK, and that does make a big difference to some employers. And also the employer must pay the immigration skills charge before issuing the cause. The good news is that the first two of those will also die with Tier 2 on the 31st of December. And when we move into the replacement for Tier 2, both the restricted cause and the resident labour market are being abolished completely. So let's just have a quick look at how the new skilled worker visa from the 1st of January will be different from Tier 2. And this is something I harvested from just the publication that came out yesterday when the Home Secretary announced more details about the upcoming new immigration system for the UK, where EU nationals are being brought into a new system, and at the same time, the system is being tweaked. And I would go so far as to say that all of the tweaks in the turnover from Tier 2 to skilled worker are actually good tweaks and are beneficial tweaks, especially to folks like yourself. So just to confirm, the full rules and eligibility for the skilled worker visa that you would be applying for if you were coming after the 1st of January next year have not been announced yet, but there is detailed information that was announced just yesterday, and that's on the government website, and I'll give you a link in a moment. Interestingly, the government has, in general, dropped the minimum skill level to level 3. So remember, I was saying it was very generous that creative jobs can be at level 4. Well, the general level for Tier 2 will drop to level 3, which is A-level level. So that's an interesting change and possibly beneficial. The minimum salary is going to be reduced. It won't be 30,000, it will be 25,600, and there will still be a new entrant minimum, and that will be reduced a bit as well, from 20,800 to 20,480. It's not much of a reduction. The definition of new entrant is to be expanded. From the information I looked at, it didn't seem like it would benefit anybody who's here today, but it's worth having a look to see if that would benefit you. But if you're under 26 anyway when you apply, you are covered anyway. But if you're over 26, you might want to have a look at whether the expansion of new entrant helps you out so you can get a job that meets the lower salary. The interesting part, of course, and the whole point of a points-based system, which it's being advertised at, is that you can what's called trade points. Now, I'm not going to go into this. If I'm invited back next year at a point when the system actually exists and people are making applications, we can go into it in much more detail. But the principle is that you need to achieve a certain number of points to get the visa, but the points can come from various sources. So, for example, you get fewer points for a lower salary, but you might get more points for your qualification, that kind of trade-off. But there's detail about that in the 13th of July document. And as I hinted earlier on, in the changeover to the skilled worker, employers will no longer have numbers of causes restricted. That will all be abolished. And finally, the resident labour market test will be abolished. So employers don't need to either prove or even undertake a test of whether there's somebody local who can do the job. That has always been quite onerous on employers. So that's a very good move. That will all be gone once Tier 2 is gone from the 31st of December. If you want to have a look at yesterday's document with more detail about the whole of the new points-based immigration system, but especially about the skilled worker, I've made a tiny URL there. So it's tinyurl.com/PBS July 2020. So PBS July 2020, and that's the full statement by the Home Secretary yesterday. Now, we have had about half an hour. Before I take a few questions, I just wanted to possibly anticipate some questions that are quite common and quite understandable about switching from Tier 4 to Tier 2. So possibly, and Jim, if you're looking in the chat, some of these may have been covered. So some common problems that do come up, and as you can see, I've said in Tier 2 general or in skilled worker, because they're going to be very similar. So first of all, the employer is not a sponsor, so they don't have a license to bring people under Tier 4 or under skilled worker. and they have no intention on doing so. Well, that's very straightforward. They can't sponsor you for a visa. A tier 2 visa as it is now, or a skilled worker visa as it will be, is only available for jobs with employers who have the relevant license. So if they don't have it and they don't intend to get it, then that's the end of that. If the employer has applied for but is waiting for their sponsor license, that's obviously much better news, because when they get their license, they can issue a cost and sponsor you for a job. But if you are applying in the UK, that can sometimes be a problem. So the way I've said it here is you do need to wait until they have the license. And this may mean that you run out of time to apply in the UK before your visa ends. Because if you've only got a bit of time left on your tier 4 visa and the employer still doesn't have their license, you might just run out of time. So do keep in regular contact with the sponsor and make sure that both of you are prepared for an application in your home country if necessary. And as I've been saying, that does, under tier 2 anyway, add some extra requirements for the employer. So it is a different matter for the employer if you're applying outside of the UK. So that's about employers and their licenses. So a couple of other things. What about if an employer says they need to see your results or evidence that you've completed your course before issuing the COS? Because I've already said earlier that you can apply up to 3 months before the end of the course. Well, that was a relatively recent change. That only kicked in April 2019. And you may find that some employers are still looking at old guidelines which say you can only issue a COS if someone's finished their tier 4 course, or even older than that if someone's got the results of their tier 4 course. So my answer to that is, well, it depends. It might be that the qualification is a condition of the job, so it's nothing to do with the visa. It's actually the qualification is needed for the job, and that's why they want to see it before they offer you the job. So that's a different matter. Or, as I hinted at just now, the employer might be unaware of recent changes, so you might need to do a little bit of unpicking there. If they want to see your results, but it seems irrelevant to the actual job, and it seems to be something about the visa, they may have got their wires crossed. What about, and this is a bigger question, but I wanted to just give it a little bit of lip service. So what about an ad or a job spec that asks if you have a work permit, in quotes, or says that you must have permission to work in the UK? Now, people can get very kind of anxious about this, and it really depends on what the employer means. So I've said, check with the employer what they mean by this. They may be saying that they're not a tier 2 or skilled worker sponsor, so they can only sponsor people who already can work in the UK. They may be saying that. Or they may be saying, well, this job doesn't meet the minimum skill or salary, so even though we are a sponsor, we can't sponsor you for this particular job. So they may mean one of those two things. It would be nice if they would say that a bit more directly, I suppose. Or, and this is quite common, it might just be poor wording, because they might just be kind of covering themselves legally to say that everybody who works for us needs to be working lawfully. But that includes people that they sponsor for a tier 2 visa. So I would say don't be too put off if you see something like that, but do check what they mean exactly, because you don't want to waste your time if the job is ultimately not going to be available to you. But that may not be what they're saying. So do unpick that a little bit. Couple more. So what about if you're outside of the UK, perhaps because for COVID-related reasons, or you've just finished your course and you're doing travel and you want to come back to the UK before your tier 4 visa expires to apply in the UK for your tier 2 with all of the benefits that I've mentioned, if that's possible to do. Well, that's fine. If you are re-entering the UK in the end part of your tier 4 visa, that is totally fine. You might find that the border officer, if you see one, will ask for evidence that you're making a tier 2 application, or you might be somebody who can use the e-gates anyway. But just to say that is totally fine to re-enter the UK on the last part of your tier 4 visa. It's technically fine to enter on the last day, but they probably would want to see evidence that you were applying that day. But what's very different is you want to apply in the UK for your tier 2 and then go off traveling, because remember, you keep your passport for the duration of an application in the UK. So you want to apply in the UK and then travel while the application is being processed. Well, that is absolutely not fine, because leaving what's called the common travel area, which is the UK, the Republic of Ireland, and the islands of the UK, while the application is pending, withdraws that application. So that's a very different matter. Re-enter on your Tier 4 visa in order to apply, absolutely fine. Leave and try to re-enter while the application's pending with the Home Office, absolutely not, because you will have withdrawn your application and you are no longer either Tier 4 or Tier 2. So stay in the UK in that way until you've got your Tier 2 visa. So more information and advice about Tier 2, well, there's lots of resources. The first resource is UKISA, the UK Council for International Student Affairs, who I do a bit of work for sometimes, and they have a very good section of their website on working after studies, and in particular on switching from Tier 4 to Tier 2. If you want to look at any of the register of Tier 2 sponsors, because there's a big list of about 30,000 companies that sponsor under Tier 2, or any of the appendices to the immigration rules, so the eligible jobs or the shortage occupation list, just go to gov.uk and do a search for those. You can find those. Other things really are for you to deal with the employer themselves. So getting the certificate of sponsorship, advice on the application, when you can start work, that's all about your Tier 2 sponsor employer. So they are the people to talk to about that. And if you want to look at some blogs about recent changes to Tier 2, which, full disclosure, I wrote, or in dealing with employers, the UKISA website does have a couple of blogs that I've written in the last year or so about that kind of thing. And finally, just a reminder again that there was a big announcement yesterday with more of the details about the new scheme that will replace Tier 2 from the 1st of January. So you can use that, that URL to get there, tinyurl.com. Okay, so moving on from Tier 2, let's just look at a few other types of visas that, depending on aspects of you and your plans and your studies and other things that you don't have control over it sometimes, and you'll see what I mean later, there may be other things that you're eligible for. So let's just have a quick look at the startup scheme. Now, the startup scheme is the only visa for people who are in the early stages of setting up their own business. So that's it's very useful. It replaced a previous type of visa called Tier 1 Graduate Entrepreneur, and is actually a bit more open than Tier 1 Graduate Entrepreneur is. And good news is that Ravensbourne is an endorsing body for startup visas, and I'll give you the contact details for the end if you want more information. But very briefly, what you'd need to do is come up with what the rules call an innovative, viable, and scalable business plan. So you need to put that together, and I'm sure that's something you can do in conjunction or with advice from my colleagues at the university. People with current Tier 4 visas can switch in, which is great. And there is what's called an entry clearance route. That's just kind of the technical term for applying for a visa outside of the UK. It used to be under Tier 1 Graduate and Entrepreneur that you could only switch in the UK, which wasn't really very fair if you were kind of, you know, if you didn't have a lot of time left at the end of your Tier 4 visa in order to put together a business plan, or you wanted to just, you know, breathe for a while and do it in the future, then you couldn't. But you can now, which is great. So you can apply in your home country after taking a bit of time to get yourself together. You get 2 years visa to come to the UK, which is great because it used to be 1 year under Graduate Entrepreneur, and you can do other work as well. So you're not expected to be fully making your living from your brand new business, which is sensible. You can do other work on top of that as well, and that's really any work apart from the work that the forbidden work for everybody on a visa, which is professional sport and professional entertainment. And then what you can do if your innovative, viable and scalable business plan seems to be going very well, and either during or at the end of the 2 years you want to continue, you can switch to a kind of higher level visa, the innovator rather, if the business is succeeding. And that has replaced the old entrepreneur visa. There's been quite a bit of rebranding, as you can probably tell, behind the scenes. But in most cases, it's not just rebranding. There have been some useful tweaks behind the scenes as well. Okay, so if you want any more information on getting an endorsement from the university for the startup scheme, or anything more about how it works, you can contact Harsmith or Sunita Bhuwani, and they have the email address especially dedicated for inquiries about the startup scheme endorsements, and that's incubation@rave.ac.uk. So that's the startup scheme, hopefully useful to some of you. You may be looking into it already. Now, Tier 5 government authorised exchange. My animation's gone a bit awry here, so you can see everything at once. I put Tier 5 in brackets just simply because when it all changes over to the new system on the 1st of January, this is being retained. They're just dropping the name of Tier 5. So a government authorised exchange is a visa extension for an internship or for professional training. So that's an extension from Tier 4 into a work visa, but it's a specific work visa, not a Tier 2 visa, but a government authorised exchange visa for an internship or for professional training. It's not for a permanent job, so it's not an alternative to Tier 2 if they're not a Tier 2 license. And to be honest, most organisations have both licenses anyway. You get permission to be in the UK for 1 year or 2 years, depending on the scheme itself. And there are two different ways of finding the information. For internships, there's an overarching body called tier5intern.com that they have a kind of sponsorship role for bringing together employers and interns. And it's tier5intern.com who sponsor the visa. It's not the employer. So that's very handy for employers who may either don't have a Tier 2 or other kind of sponsor license, or they do, but they can't really sponsor you for this internship because it doesn't meet the required salary, etc. But they can kind of get a third party, tier5intern.com, to organize the visa aspects of the internship for you. And if you go to tier5intern.com, you'll see it splits into information for interns and information for employers. So that could be very handy, and you might find yourself being the connection between those two parties, with you being one of the parties. If it's not for an internship, but it's for professional training, so towards a recognised qualification or registration, there may be a scheme available under the government authorised exchange. Have a look at Appendix K of the immigration rules, and that lists all of the different schemes for professional training. That's for internships and professional training. Now, having said that there is no such thing as a visa that just allows you to come and work because you want to, without any particular, or indeed any, sponsorship from an employer, that I was slightly lying, but because there is such a visa, but it's not for everybody. So that's what's called the Youth Mobility Scheme. At the moment, the Tier 5 Youth Mobility Scheme, and then just in future, just the Youth Mobility Scheme. So what's this all about? Well, this is for very specific passport holders. So my apologies if you're not one of these passport holders. It's for passport holders of Australia, Canada, Japan, Monaco, New Zealand, Hong Kong SAR passport, South Korea, Taiwan, and people with a British national overseas passport. Now, this is nothing to do with the proposed plans to allow British national overseas to come to the UK from Hong Kong and live and work. This is an existing scheme that happens to include British nationals overseas. If your country is not listed in there, that's because they have decided not to take part in this scheme. It is a reciprocal scheme. Only for people aged 18 to 30, so my apologies if you are already timed out of the scheme. You can't bring dependents with you, and I probably should have said that you can only apply in your home country. Sorry about that. You can't switch to this scheme within the UK. And my understanding is that even with the current concessions to allow switching that you can't normally do, my understanding is that you still can't switch into this scheme from within the UK. That's certainly my reading anyway. So this would be something you do from your home country. So no dependents can come. You get 2 years. You can do any work or any study without any kind of employer or university sponsorship, because in effect you and your country are your own sponsor. And the good news is that I checked under the new skilled worker information, and by my reading anyway, although I've only had 24 hours to read it, you can, if you come under youth mobility and you get a skilled job, my reading from what they're saying at the moment anyway, is that you will be able to switch into the skilled worker route. So if you are one of those passport holders of that age and with no dependents, that could be a useful, in effect, it's like the graduate route, I suppose, but only for people of those nationalities. What about other options? Well, there are lots of other options. I've picked out all the ones that I think are mostly relevant. I'm going to chuck in just one or two, as well as the government authorised exchange schemes for internships and professional training. There are other Tier 5 government authorised exchange schemes, particularly for work experience. Almost all of them you can only apply in your home country. So here we go with another appendix of the immigration rules, Appendix N, which is the full list of all of the Tier 5 government authorised exchange schemes. They tend to be very specific and have been set up for very specific areas of work. And not a lot of them are for people at the very beginning of their career. They're quite often for people to do exchanges partway through their career. So do have a look at the list, and it's a real mixed bag of various different schemes that I suppose in effect don't fit anywhere else, but the people who organise them are allowed to bring people to the UK to do them. The Global Talent Visa, I'm going to leave for people to look at and make their own judgment about their own eligibility for it. What the government say is that it's for people with world-class leadership potential in their field. It's also for people who already have world-class talent in their field. And no disrespect to yourselves, but I imagine that you are probably more in this tranche, which is people with potential for world-class leadership. Have a look for global talent visas. They need to be endorsed not by your university, but by public bodies that have been decided that they have the relative, the knowledge to make the judgment about future leaders in the field that they represent. So do have a look at that. It's quite a high bar and quite a highfalutin visa, but a very nice one if you are eligible. Of course, if you have family in the UK, you may well be eligible under that type of visa. Not my area of expertise at all, but you know, of course, if you during your time here in the UK, depending how long you've been here, if you do have a UK-based partner and could stay on that basis, possibly, I don't know. You'd need to have a look at the general information at gov.uk about visas and immigration, and another kind of shout out for UKISA with their working after studies information. Okay. Now, Jim, we are coming up to 2 o'clock. We did start a bit late.
Yeah, just one question that's come up, which is, well, 2 different questions. First question from a Zoom user who's been asking about, I guess, a transition from undergraduate study to postgraduate study on a Tier 4 visa. Is that just a case of kind of applying for that postgraduate course?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm only really talking about work visas today. Yeah, that would be something to check with the university's experts on visa, sure. Tier 4 extensions, yeah.
Sure, so perhaps, yeah, if you'd like to get in touch with maybe our admissions team, Zoom user, then that might be the best place to ask that kind of question, yeah. Or just with the postgraduate course, because they'll be dealing with lots of people on kind of Tier 4.
Yeah, there'll be lots of people in that position, I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure they'll, I know they were also asking about impact of coronavirus, but I think probably the course will have the best way to kind of explain.
Well, on recruitment?
I think they were just asking about, yeah, potentially what it means for a Tier 4 visa with coronavirus, and the impact on whether you're studying remotely or not. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't really have any effect on work visas.
No, exactly. But I'm just saying that was,
I mean, on the UKISA website, they've got a very good guide to all of the issues that are being affected by the current pandemic, both immigration and non-immigration, aimed at people who are studying in the UK, mostly with Tier 4 visas. So if you go to ukisa.org.uk, and their front banner is a really detailed and updated most days about coronavirus issues more generally for people in the UK on visas of all kinds.
That'd be great. And I know Gail very kindly offered, if that user wants to drop Gail Bunbury an email, then she can chat to you about more details about that. Or you can look at the Tier 4 offer holder website, which has just been set up on them, which you can find from the main website as well. Yeah. Other question we have is just a question from Yvonne about kind of Tier 5 internships, and I guess the process around whether that applies to kind of creative roles that kind of might be relevant to our students. it's a case of just approaching companies to try and set them up?
Yeah, I think so. I guess it's 2 stages. It's and the tier5intern.com website is really detailed as the kind of clearinghouse for bringing the interns and the companies together. But I would say, especially for either for companies that wouldn't have any other way of doing it, so not under tier 2, not under anything else, or for interns themselves who wouldn't come under any of the other existing routes, then I would say it would be the only, not only the ideal route, but the only route for doing that. But it would be a matter of securing the internship, but at the same time as securing the internship, making sure that the provider is also speaking to the overarching body, because it's the overarching body that issues the certificate of sponsorship for the visa application to be made. And hopefully the news hasn't been too bad. Obviously the news about the graduate scheme is very annoying for people who are not eligible for it, especially because it was announced in September 2019. And people have asked sometimes, why was it announced so early? Was it just to annoy people who weren't going to be eligible for it? Well, clearly no. The reason it was announced so early in September 2019 was so that going forward, universities could use it in their recruitment for people starting in 2020 who would be eligible for it in 2021. So it's as plain as that, unfortunately. But hopefully, I think especially, even though, as we all know, both the economy and the whole world of recruitment is really kind of in a sort of state of kind of flux meets paralysis at the moment. I think it's really just a good accident of timing, the opposite of the graduate route, that the skilled worker route is coming in January. Because if the reality for you is that you find that you're not able to switch into tier 2 during the last part of your tier 4 visa for reasons that are beyond your control, either COVID related or otherwise, you have this new opportunity from January 2021 to come back to the UK with a visa that is actually much more accessible than tier 2 overseas is at the moment. But I also wanted to just remind you of the things that you can already do with your tier 4 visa in the context of what we're talking about today. So let's just have a look at, I'm sure this is a reminder, I'm sure you know about these things already, but really, because I think it's so important to make the most of what you can already do, even if you don't make any other kind of application. So a reminder that you can work 20 hours a week during term time. Those 20 hours a week are strict. There has been a concession recently under the pandemic that some people working in some jobs can work more than 20 hours during term time, but that has been restricted only to healthcare jobs. It is in the special guidance that UKISA has put out. So no time limit in vacations. So there's 20 hours a week during term time, even if you're distance learning, but no limit in vacations. And just a reminder that if you're in a dissertation period, that is term time. It's not vacation time. And there's your reminder that the concession is only for healthcare workers. There's no time limit in the hours you can work between the formal end date of your course and the end of your visa, which is usually 4 months. So that period of time you can work as you please. And as I mentioned earlier in the context of applying for Tier 2, you can travel and re-enter the UK during that period, the whole of that usually plus 4 month period. That is absolutely fine to travel and re-enter the UK, including, as I said earlier, re-entering the UK to do a Tier 2 application. Now, remember though, it's not all good news that you can just do exactly as you please, because there are some restrictions still on the type of work you can do, not on the hours of work, but on the type of work. So let's just quickly run through those. So you can't be self-employed, and you can't undertake what is called business activity. Now, this business activity is not fully defined. It's partially defined in the Tier 4 policy guidance and includes things like working for a company where you own more than 10% of the shares. But it really, it's almost like if it smells like business activity, you might want to think it is business activity, because there's only 3 examples in the Tier 4 policy guidance, and there could be a lot more. So I would say if it feels like business activity, don't do it. You can't take a permanent full-time job with a Tier 4 visa, except you can start your Tier 2 job if you've applied for it. and been granted it. You can't be a professional sports person. That's really just that's a general, it's nothing to do with Tier 4. That's just a general condition on every visa to protect professional sports bodies, recruitment, integrity, etc. No work as an entertainer, sadly. So having on one hand said that entertainers are included as creative people for Tier 2, unfortunately, you can't work as an entertainer under Tier 4. So I appreciate that that doesn't quite hang together, but there you go. No work as a doctor or dentist in training, if you were thinking of doing that. And also, if you want to have a look at a blog that, again, full disclosure, I wrote for UKISA about all of the different questions that in my long career people have asked me, what can I do this with my Tier 4 visa? Can I do that with my Tier 4 visa? I wrote a whole blog about it, including some really off-the-wall ones, like can I go on Britain's Got Talent? Can I be a cryptocurrency miner? Can I walk dogs? And all kinds of things. So I try to cover everything from rather bizarre questions to actually quite sensible questions on the UKISA work blog. So do have a look at that. And I think that's all I have for you. Yeah, that's all I have.
Let me start my video. One interesting one from Gail, who points out that she believes that we may have some students who would qualify, I guess, through their families, to look at the Tier 1 investor option.
Oh, yes. I mean, to be honest, I didn't go into that because while I did go into a couple of the niche ones, like the people that are only certain nationalities, it feels Tier 1 investor is even more niche. I mean, that's for people with a very high net worth, basically very, very rich people, which, I'm happy for you if that's you, but there's lots of information about that on the gov.uk website.
I mean, now I've mentioned it, if people are curious, I believe that's what, a £2 million investment, minimum of £2 million investment.
Yeah, it's not my area of expertise,
for a couple of years, yeah. And then that extends beyond that to allow people to actually apply. But yeah,
that's why it's worth looking in general at everything in the work visa. I've only picked out the ones that are more commonly useful to students. There are all kinds of work visas. Most of them probably not relevant to most people here today, but some of them might be, including investor.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, well, look, thank you so much for your time. I'm not sure if we've had any more questions. We have not, as far as I know. I think Yvonne and I might take away some of the stuff around the Tier 5 internship option and kind of see what we can put together for students and
I would certainly want
companies.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would want to say that if people have watched this far is that obviously everything I've said is kind of as of today, or in some cases as of yesterday with the new information. So if you're reviewing this information or watching it later, do remember that this happened on the 14th of July 2020. And there are all kinds of changes coming up, even in the next 6 months, particularly from the 1st of January 2021. So this video will have a life, a bit of a life, but things will change. But we may come back and do something once the changes are in place.
That would be great. I think we'll definitely bring you back to kind of do a review of those changes and kind of what's been implemented. So look, thank you so much for your time, Andrew, and everyone's been saying thanks in chat as well.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks a lot for coming.
To have you here, and thanks to everyone else who came along. And cheers.